Be looking at some influences that affect our body's ability to maintain weight, lose weight, gain weight. You are a Molotov cocktail of hormones and everything that you put in you. And hormones are what rule the world when it comes to your body a lot of times. And it's there is some research. There is not a whole heck of a lot of research that is out there, at least good study research. There's only a handful, I think, off the top of my head that look at some of the various different factors in terms of basal metabolic rate or resting metabolic rate, which we established last time is basically the same dang thing, just a few percentage points difference between the two. So who cares? But there are a lot of things that can affect your energy balance, energy in, energy out. And a lot of those are your body and how the different hormones get secreted. Because the body doesn't understand. The body don't know that we're living in an age where we have easily available food all over the place. You could trip over it in most places. In some places, I get it. Food deserts exist. They shouldn't, but they do. So, not necessarily good, nutritious food is available in those locales, but food is everywhere. We can get it relatively easily, speaking. And that wasn't always the case throughout our evolutionary history. So, let's look at some of these, excuse me, factors that influence our body weight. All right, these are some of the um, interesting ones. Genetics. It's pretty interesting, and I was going to try to pull it up. Um, I couldn't. I had other things I ultimately had to do, so I apologize. Looking at how your genetics play a role into it. There are a number of genes. There's a gene. There's an OB gene. And then there are a number of other genes that play a role in it, but there is an obesity gene, and they've been able to manipulate that in mice, mess with that gene sequence, take it out, um, and or fiddle with it a little bit, and they've been able to create mice that put on a lot of weight and can't take it off. They've manipulated another way, and they've been able to get mice to be able to eat and eat and eat and eat, and they're not gaining very much weight at all. So I'm sure there will be a lot more that goes in on this in the future, but there is some research out there right now. A lot of it is in mice and whatnot, because a lot of these things, when you apply it to the human, there are just way too many other variables that go into it. Mice don't have all the interactions that we do in a day with various different foods, how much food, the amount of food we eat, when we eat it, all that stuff. So there's a lot of things that are way different in us than comparably to a uh, laboratory animal. But genetics do play a role in that. There are genetics involved in resting or basal metabolic rate, those that affect hormone production, body size frame, fat distributions. All of these things have genetic influences on them. Now, genetics do not define you. Okay. Just because everybody in your family may have certain types of diseases or cancers does not necessarily mean you are going to ultimately get it. Okay. High degree of, there's type 2 diabetes, there's heart attacks in my side of the family, on one side of my family, both sides. There's also a lot of unhealthy factors associated with some of those outcomes, those negative outcomes. And I don't necessarily subscribe to those. So genetics, again, don't really define everything. It has a lot to do with environment. And that's where nutrigenomics comes in. And nutrigenomics is a branch of genomic science that looks at how nutrition affects the genome, and there's genome nutritionists that look at how the opposite way around, how different genomes can affect how we use nutrition. So it's pretty interesting looking at how these two factors both play with each other, which sounds, that sounds weird, so I apologize. Looking at some of their prenatal factors, there are a number of factors that go into before you were even born. Your mom and your dad's health have a huge effect on your outcome down the road, which is pretty interesting. And this is a link right here This right here is a link, guys, if you're interested. It looks at, it's a link to a Harvard study, obesity and prevention, with prenatal being the primarily the focus there. And they were showing that physically active lifestyle and proper diet can help with your children actually avoiding obesity later on in life. And they identified basically 3 modifiable things you can change: prenatal factors that shape fetal nutrition and health later on down the road. What's down the road? Year 1? No, we're talking into their teens, into their adulthood life. So these are lifelong things that you as a mom, okay, because these are all mother related, can affect just by not smoking. Smoking can potentially cause low birth weight children, and low birth weight children have a much more negative outcome, difficult births, a lot more health problems down the road. I get it. We all know that one lady who smoked her entire pregnancy, had a 12-pound kid. Awesome. Mazel tov. It's called an average. And on average, most women who smoke produce children who are slightly lower in weight. Mother's weight gain during pregnancy. Weight gain, and we'll talk about this in the last unit after this one here. Mother's weight gain during pregnancy. There is an ideal amount of weight a woman should typically gain, depending upon if she's normal weight, overweight, or obese. Again, talk about that later. But if a woman gains too much weight during her pregnancy, it's been shown to have a much more negative outcome on the child becoming obese later on in life. Pretty interesting. Blood sugar as well. If she develops gestational diabetes that only develops during pregnancy, goes away after you give birth. Blood sugar levels. If blood sugar levels were all wacky, that affects the child, that affects the child's development, and that affects how things are expressed down the road. It's a fascinating study. These are some studies that take a lot of time to do. 15, 20, 25, 30 years. I think there's supposed to be a study coming out either this year or next year. I thought it was supposed to be in 2020, but pandemic, nothing works right this year. It's pretty interesting, some of these concepts here. And here's some highlights here of these. 14 studies, maternal smoking during pregnancy was associated with 50% higher risk of childhood obesity. 50-50. Flip a coin. It mind blows me that people cannot just put the cancer stick down. Mother's weight gain. Children who had an excessive amount of weight gain were 4 times the risk of being overweight at age 3, compared with children who gained an inadequate amount of weight. So mother's weight is huge for this. 4 times the risk of being overweight just at age 3. If you're overweight or obese at a much early age, so much stress, so much wear and tear on the body, the chances of them becoming not obese later on down the road into their early adulthood, really difficult for that. Children who are obese tend to become adults who are obese. Here's the one for gestational diabetes. Again, just being that insulin resistant. Insulin resistance causes an increase in central body fat, central body obesity, and that can manifest a much larger birth, which I don't know I assume there's 1 or 2 of you in here who've had children. You know, big head, small hole. The bigger the mass you got to push out, the more difficult the birth, the more room for complications, and also the increase in body fat on that baby as well is going to negatively affect them early in childhood development and as they continue into adulthood. So there are a number of reasons. As soon as you realize that you want to try to have children, start preparing. Take it prenatal vitamins. Start to exercise. Start to watch what you eat. It can make a hell of a lot difficult on yourself if you eat like crap trying to get pregnant. Some people are just naturally gifted in being fertile. But those that are obese tend to have a much more difficult time having children. There is a theory out there, and it's kind of interesting. It's referred to as the it is referred to as the thrifty gene. We refer to it as the set point theory. All of you sitting in here right now, not listening to me, all of you have a set point, thermostat, if you will, where you are genetically predetermined. There are a number of genes, and if I could have remembered, could have pulled up I have a 23andMe thing I did a bunch of years ago. It's pretty interesting. There are a number of genes associated with this concept of set point. Everybody has kind of this genetic predetermination of body composition. Certain types of skeletal muscles, certain amount of skeletal muscle, lean muscle mass, certain amount of non-lean muscle mass, fat. And everybody has this, and your training can dictate kind of where you kind of go in this set point. Think of it as a weight range that you feel comfortable in, right? For me, my set point's around what'd they say? Like 195-ish, 198, somewhere in that ballpark. And for me, that's on the higher end of where I feel comfortable at. I don't like to be above 195, but it's harder for me to stay below 195. So for my set, I mean, it's pretty spot on. Just because it's easier for me to put on lean muscle mass. It's also just as easy for me to put on non-lean muscle mass. And that's what it bears out in some of the gene factors that they look at when they do your genomic sequence. And everybody has this. This set point dovetails into our next topic. This set point is basically, again, like I said, your thermostat. So when you start to go above and below your set point, your weight range that your body likes you to be at, it will start secreting or stop secreting hormones depending upon which way you go. Start to lose weight or start to gain weight. And it's the hormones that they're finding that gives people such a difficult time in potentially losing that weight. Okay. That's one of the reasons why they think obese people have a really hard time with losing weight, is because of this set point theory and where your body is. Now, let's play around here. Let's say there's your set point. Let's just say it's 195 for grins and giggles. Let's say, you become lazy. Everybody gets lazy at one point. And you gain maybe 10 pounds. Well, as you've gained that weight, your body's been trying to get you back to that 195. But let's say you're there for like a few years. That would be a long time. Can your set point reset? Potentially, it can. There is a huge study that got released yesterday talking about this concept and how metabolically active you are, your resting or basal metabolic rate, and what happens with this set point. And it's pretty interesting. If you go into a negative caloric state, your resting metabolic rate will go down a little bit, which will cause you to lose weight. Not be as active though, but you're still going to lose weight. These are obese individuals in the study. Did that for 4 weeks, negative caloric intake. Like they only ate like 1,000 calories. And they're probably eating 3,000, 4,000, 6,000 calories a day to get to that point. Then after 4 weeks, they went on maintenance where they ate 2,000 calories a day, the normal amount that you should eat. And periodically checked in on them for a year. And they found that their metabolic markers actually adjusted for their new weight, and they were able to maintain their weight for that entire year after going into a negative caloric state. They were expounded upon that, saying that if you went on a 4-week restricted diet, then maintained for the next 4 to 6 weeks, and then did another restrictive diet again for 4 weeks, that potential cycling could allow someone to be comfortable with that weight, reset their set point, and allow some of these chemicals that we're going to talk about here in a second to reset as well and get used to where they are now at. The body has a huge effect on the brain, and the hormones that it secretes have a huge effect on the body and how it holds on to weight and how it freely gives it away. All right. This concept of gaining and losing weight is referred to as weight cycling, and it's not yo-yo dieting. Yo-yo dieting is when you eat really good and then eat like crap, and then eat really good and then eat like crap again. Okay. But this set point theory leads us into the different types of states that we have. We have 3 major behaviors, I guess. I was going to say states, but behaviors is probably the better way to say it. We have a phase of hunger, phase of appetite, and satiety. And to me, I look at really hunger is, I guess you could see a difference, but for me, I look at hunger and satiety. Okay. Hunger, physiological sensations that drive us to find food. Okay. And we'll talk about what those are, but physiological stuff happening in the body. Okay. Stuff that's happening in the body. And we'll talk about some of those fancy pants ways. Okay. Appetite is, which for me goes hand in hand with hunger, is the desire to eat. Okay. And I guess there are semantics. It's desire to eat appealing food. What's appealing food? I don't know. I know it's appealing to me, but that may not be what's appealing to you. So that's very subjective. So for me, I put appetite and hunger kind of together. Okay. Hunger, appetite, drive to go find food to eat it. I guess the difference between them is the word appealing. I guess with hunger, you'll eat anything, and appetite, only something specific. I don't know. The opposite end of the spectrum, if you're going to find food, is not going to find food. And that's what satiety is. Satiety is contentment. Okay. This is when you've consumed enough that you feel satisfied and you're not hungry anymore. All right. So we have this concept of hunger and concept of satiety that drive us to do what we do. Go find a bag of Doritos. Go find a nice ham sandwich. Whatever in the world you go eat. Okay. The various different hormones that our body secretes because of these two opposing behaviors is what drives us to go find some of these foods, eat some of these foods, and gorge out on some of these foods. And understanding the gorging process compared to the satiety process is interesting. And again, it's hormone related. Some of the physical sensations, and we talked about some of the psychological. These are just physiological changes, not psychological. Thinking about food being made, or smelling food being made and then thinking about it, or reminds you that reminds me of grandma's house at Christmas. Okay, those are psychological stuff, limbic system stuff that happens in the brain, memories, all that nonsense. Physiological changes, hunger pains, okay, stomach gurgling, okay, hunger pains, the contractions that start, okay, when you get hungry, there are sensations that the body picks up on, and it actually kickstarts some of the digestive tract. And one of those things that it really kicks in is the stomach. The stomach has 3 different layers of muscle in it, remember? It's the only one that does. So that stomach will start kind of, and it's painful when it's empty and starts stimulating contractions. It wants food. It wants something filled in it. So that's going to drive you to go find foods. And there are hormones to help trigger those reflex centers in the body, those drive centers in the body, in the brain, to go find food. Food, water, sex, those are the 3 basic drives that we have in our brain. Go find food, go find water, go find sex. All right. So we have different chemoreceptors in the body that detect for different things to stimulate those areas to go find food when the stomach starts contracting and you feel all painful inside. As you eat that food and that stomach expands, it'll send a signal to the brain. There's baroreceptors. These are receptors that detect for pressure changes. And as that stomach fills up, pressure increases within it. As it expands, pushes out on all the other stuff within the surrounding tissue. And that helps to signal the brain to say, I'm good, man. I'm content. And it'll release some other chemicals to say, stop eating. The body is a fantastic, marvelous thing. It secretes hormones, chemicals to tell you to do things, to not do things. Fascinating. For those that are overweight, the research says over fat. So for those that are overweight and obese, they don't recognize the fullness sensations a lot of times. So they'll continue to eat and to eat and to eat. So they blow past that stop sign that says, satiety here, stop. They just keep eating. And if you've ever been super, super hungry and you just eat and eat and eat, you've been there before where you ate too much and you feel way too full and that's too much pressure. And then you just feel, you don't feel good. And for people who are overweight and obese, they don't recognize that sensation a lot of times. So they keep pounding on the calories and not necessarily realizing it until they've stretched it way too far. And then that super pain causes them to stop. Foods play a factor in this as well. We live in an environment where it's referred to as obesogenic, just an environment that promotes weight gain. We have a lot of foods that are very high calorie foods. We have a lot of things that we practice where we don't have to put forth a lot of effort or activity at all. So you have these high calorie foods and a lot of environment that causes you to really do absolutely nothing. I can sit here and I can order food all day long, right? And I don't have to get my fat butt up and do anything about it. So this is an obesogenic environment. Obviously, if more low calorie dense food can, aid weight loss, aid the ability to maintain weight. But, that takes work and that takes effort. And that's what's difficult for a lot of people. And even how foods are created now. Foods are created to be more savory, to sit on a shelf for a much longer period of time. 6 months, a year. And so they're going to be very high in carbohydrates, very high in fat content to be able to maintain that, integrity on the shelf. And those don't exist in the real world. High carb, high fat foods don't exist in the real world. They exist in the world of man-made crap. And if your diet is predominantly man-made stuff and not real food, you could see where this would catch up with you really quick.